What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello, and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that puts leadership in focus. I am Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the leader of the Liberal Democrats. That is, if she isn't already Prime Minister, just like David Steele was before her. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss everything from the continuing US-China trade war to the latest gossip and goings-on from the country's diplomatic corps, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course the current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Lee Summers, founder and CEO of Oakmore Builders. Located in Bromley, Oakmore Builders is a leading building service company. Established just 4 years ago, it has achieved phenomenal success, growing to become Bromley's leading builder. After starting out as an apprentice at the age of 15, Lee has over 30 years' experience in the construction industry. Since founding the company in 2015, it has gone from strength to strength. We discuss the business and the future of the sector and the country now. Lee, welcome.
Hi, Jonathan.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for joining us today. And I thought we should get started, really. You know, it's been a few months since Oakmore has been in the review. I think the listeners was, first of all, love to know how yourself and the business is going.
So things are really good at the moment. Obviously, coming up to Christmas, a little bit of a quiet period in residential construction, obviously, because nobody wants to sit in their house over Christmas. Because obviously time for family and stuff, and the nature of the business is quite a messy affair anyway, as I'm sure you're aware. But other than that, yeah, we're going from strength to strength with Oakmore. We're clearly the London Borough of Bromley's leading builder, and we're basically just concentrating all our efforts on residential home extensions.
Excellent. But yeah.
So we're doing really well at the moment. We've got a booked up schedule for next year, and we're getting possibly between 5 and 10 major inquiries every day.
Superb. So keeping busy then, just to put it to say the least.
Very busy. Yeah.
No, I think, as you pointed out in the article originally, often, especially through the media, construction workers often get a bad rap. But I think what you've managed to do at Oakmore is, I should say, and maybe you can elaborate on it, Lee, but certainly introduce some professionalism.
Well, I think for us, it's about, first and foremost, is obviously giving people value for money, and trying to take away the stigma attached to construction workers in general. We've had a bad name for a number of years now for obvious reasons, which I won't go into, just the general stuff, really, whistling, dressing scruffy, making a load of noise, disrespectful to the neighbours. We're the complete opposite, and we wanted to change the perception of people, the way they think about construction workers. I think one of the main ones that we discovered was construction companies weren't really in control of their finances. They'd take big hits off the job, spend all the money, and wouldn't be able to finish the work. Which is why we structure our payment schedule very clearly to the client. We make everything clear. We're totally transparent all the way through, which is why we've got a fantastic reputation, and the brand Oakmore now is recognisable. So
it's fantastic work on that front. And speaking of the brand itself, obviously now been in business for 4 years, and as you've already said, clearly going from strength to strength. What though was the first instance, Lee, of what was the inspiration of starting the firm?
Well, I think so. I juggle a lot of balls already, but I think for me to sort of hold down a job working for somebody else would have been totally impossible, because I do a lot of other things as well. I take care of my son full time. I've done as well since he was 5 years old. He's 13 now. So I have a lot on my plate. I have a lot of things to do. So a traditional 9-to-5 job wouldn't suit me, although I'm quite familiar with project management and architecture. So I could have gone into that side of things, which is what I studied. I studied architecture anyway.
Well, maybe your son can will very soon be following Dad into the family business.
Well, to be honest, I'll be totally honest, I never wanted to get into construction because it's an extremely hard game. It really takes its toll, especially if you start off at the lower ends of construction in the trade. So I never wanted him to get involved at the lower level. But I think, to be totally honest, it only does you good because you can sort of learn on site. And there's no point in sort of him taking over the firm in a few years and then just coming in that management side of things and not knowing what goes on a day-to-day basis. It just won't work.
Oh, certainly.
I think he'd like to get involved. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think some of the best CEOs in the world, obviously, of those that have worked up or at least have experience at all levels of the company they run. And looking more broadly, in fact, Lee, at the sector itself, especially in southeast London and Kent, what challenges do you see right now and into the new year facing the market at the moment?
I think, to be honest, we were always told, I think, especially since the referendum result, that in terms of Brexit, we would all be struggling, we would all be scratching about for work, we would be not in a good position with EU workers and all the rest of it. But I think that's just a lot of hot air, to be honest, because we haven't seen any deterioration in what we see as inquiries and solid leads. So people are still spending money. People are still extending their homes. I think stamp duty does us a favour as well because that's quite high. It has been for a long time. And people would rather stay in the affluent area where they live, i.e. where I live, Chislehurst, Bromley. In general, they would rather stay where they are and spend the money on the house as opposed to paying huge amounts of stamp duty for moving home. So I think we haven't seen any change, to be honest. I think a lot of it was scaremongering.
Quite, and I
say we were going to be hardest hit, but to be honest, nothing's changed. If anything, we're busier now than we have been throughout the last couple of years.
And long may it continue. But let's, I'll put you on the spot though, Lee. Let's pretend you were Secretary of State for the afternoon. You could create policy at will. Is there anything in particular that government could do right now that would, especially maybe in terms of regulation or lack thereof, that would really aid Oakmore and the sector more broadly?
Well, it's a tricky question, to be honest, because I don't think anybody knows where they are at the moment, and it seems that the government always come out and say one thing, then they change it, and it's just nobody knows what's going on. What I do wish, though, is that the government would just come out, make some clear plans, and say this and this is what we're going to do, and they execute that instead of just talking and not ever doing anything.
I think you're spot on, Lee. The enemy right now of no matter what business you're in is uncertainty, and I think there's a great frustration that you could have voted Remain, you could have voted Leave 3.5 years ago. The problem is that the decisions have not been made appropriately yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, we speak.
But I think,
go ahead. Sorry, Lee.
Sorry.
You go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I was just going to pick up on it. So I think it's a case of. I think the government was shocked into the result, what the result was of the referendum. I think they've tried to do everything they can really to try not to see this Brexit through. So I think that anyone who's obviously in government, obviously Boris Johnson at the moment, I think he's got a tough job on his hands, but and I think he wants to do what the people voted for, which is to leave the European Union. I mean, we're an amazing country. Surely we can stand on our own.
Absolutely.
40 years ago.
And you brought up the B word before me, so it's a fair game to talk about it. As everyone will know, we're speaking in the midst of a general election. I think as we speak, there are 8 days to go until polling day. What have been your thoughts so far, Leon? Not just the manifestos, but the personalities of the major parties.
Well, we could talk for hours, days.
We could.
I think one of my major points about a manifesto is, I think, pretty soon it should be a legally binding document. Whatever happens, that needs to be run through everybody in question, and people need to be held to account. So, if, for instance, there's a general election, Conservatives or Labour or Lib Dems or whoever come out with their manifesto, most of the time it's just complete nonsense. To be totally honest, I'm just being brutal, I'm just being honest. So, they should be held to account. If they hold up a manifesto and say, this is what we're going to do, these are the changes we're going to make, this is the money we're going to put into the NHS or whatever, they should be held to account. They've got to do it. That's it. Otherwise, it's totally pointless.
Oh, without a doubt. And also, I think especially for younger people who probably are more apathetic about politics generally, and more suspicious of politicians, it really does no credit to the parties that when people see them not following through with their promises, it can really affect how people view our politics as a whole.
Exactly. And I think the way modern times are these days, especially with social media, and a lot more transparency among the people, I think people in today's politics, the general public are really, especially the younger generation, they're really seeing through these politicians now because they're smart people and they've got so much information at hand. What's happening is a government, a prime minister or a leader of a political party will stand up and give their speeches. But I think the younger generation in particular see straight through that now. We've got different times.
You're right. It's so different, isn't it? When we were growing up, you had to wait either for the tomorrow's paper or the news at 9 to hear what's going on. But people are so much more savvy today because they can instantly access the entire internet on their phone.
Exactly, and I think that they see through politicians a lot clearer than what I did, especially when I was sort of 18, 19, 20, whatever. Different times, changing times.
Oh, absolutely. So what are your hopes then for the rest of the campaign? As far as I could see it, the two choices really are either the Boris Johnson's and the Conservatives get a majority, or there'll be some form of coalition between Corbyn and Nicola Sturgeon.
So I can tell you straight away, there's going to be no coalition between Jeremy Corbyn and Nicola Sturgeon. I think Jeremy Corbyn's made that clear already, at least for the first 2 years, if they were to ever get in power.
Yes.
Unfortunately for Jeremy Corbyn, he will never be in power 100%. I think he's so delusional, it's just unbelievable. In the modern time that we live in, appearance is everything. And unfortunately for Jeremy Corbyn, he's a dead ringer for Albert Steptoe, so it's just not going to happen. He's wasting his time. Boris Johnson, blatant liar. I could give you multiple examples of his lies that have been put out in public and can be seen for everybody. So I think he'll be in his post probably for a short period of time, another year, 2 years possibly. But we need a total revolution in politics. It's not working. These people were just actors. And they're just letting the whole country down, in my opinion.
And who is the hero that's going to ride over the horizon and save us from the current mess of politicians at the moment?
Well, there's nobody.
This is the problem, isn't it? Yes.
There's nobody there. There's nobody there. It needs a total overhaul in the way that politics is conducted. There is just nobody at all that could possibly work for the people.
It's interestingly, it's fair to say, I think, that we are in a somewhat of a political crisis because of all the reasons you've explained. And in this country's history, especially since and including the war, we have usually had a leader from either side of the spectrum to come along and often sort things out. And I can't help but get the feeling that even as business ticks along and the economy grows, that no one on the political side of things has turned up this time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we're in such a mess as a country. To be totally honest, Jonathan, I travel the world quite a lot. I do a lot of business elsewhere. I travel into Europe quite a lot. I'm in the Far East quite a lot. And it really makes me sad and embarrassed, if anything, that everybody I speak to, they say, what has happened to your country? Yes. What has happened to Great Britain? It's an absolute mess. We're the laughing stock of the world, and it pains me to say that. But it's the truth. Everybody that I speak to says you are an absolute embarrassment at the moment. It's so shameful. This is Great Britain. But it's not Great Britain anymore in the eyes of myself and everybody I speak to, certainly, and people everywhere else on the planet that I visit. There's no great in Great Britain anymore. It's not a united kingdom. Nobody's united in this country anymore. If anything, we're divided, and the referendum result was a clear indication of that.
Oh, without a doubt. And I think it's fair to say, and you get this a lot from abroad, you're quite rightly, that we were known as a nation, really, that we'd just, whatever was thrown at us, we'd put our heads down and get on with it. Whereas we seem to have been in this sort of political spasm now for 3.5 years. And the problem is, it's not the people that suffer are, businesses up and down the country who are making their payroll, that are going out getting jobs done every day, but with zero certainty from the political class.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we're just in a shocking time. I mean, let's not forget that this is a tiny little island that colonised most of planet Earth back in the day. So, all the scaremongering that goes, if we leave the European Union, we're going to be in a shocking state, we're going to be in trouble. And it's just complete nonsense. I mean, we are the envy of the world still, although we are an embarrassment to the rest of the world on a daily basis. But to be totally honest, you tell me we can't survive without anybody else?
Well, this is why I'm fairly, and correct me if you disagree, Lee, but this is why I'm fairly confident, no matter what happens in this election, and indeed whatever happens with Brexit, I think the fundamentals of this country, between being the 5th largest economy in the world, the second power in NATO, having kith and kin far beyond the European Union, the Mediterranean Sea, there are things that you just think, well, whatever happens, we're probably going to be all right in the end, aren't we?
Well, we'd like to hope so. I don't see why we won't be, to be honest. Like I say, we are the envy of the world, and we've got so many attributes coming from this country. We'll survive. We always have done. You've only got to look back in history. We'll survive, and we will do, and we'll flourish. And there's no way. There's no way we can't.
Absolutely. Well, given maybe to bring it back down to earth a little bit, Lee, obviously you've had a fantastic start and setting up Oakmore, and to young people out there, especially those that might be looking to aspire to be business owners themselves one day, and when they see all of this political nonsense happening, what advice would you give to those young people starting out on their careers and journeys?
Well, it's just common sense, to be honest. First and foremost, you need to be totally honest with people. You need to work hard. You've got to have a desire. You've got to have ambition. If you don't have any of those, you're probably not going to succeed, because you've got to be really hungry and have a total focus in what you want in life and visualise the end result. So the bottom line is really you just need to work hard and focus. Have the right people on board. Have some good people around you. You have to pay them a lot of money, but you get the best result. Well, so yeah, it's quite straightforward in my opinion.
Sound advice. Well, look, Lee, I'm conscious of the time. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on it, and I hope perhaps after this nonsense of Brexit and the election is sorted out, we can speak again in when the fog of war is lifted, as it were.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Lee, pleasure talking.
Thanks very much. Cheers, John.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Lee, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Oakmore Builders are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Lord Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags for you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Eric, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that. No. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something. And it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Control Act will take place. So as we speak, we don't quite know. As well, perhaps like the government front bench don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without wrecking amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40 odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it does quite shock them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we were left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as you correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition that claim to want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments, they introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you, I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously, representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? You hang in there, it'll be all right?
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because, you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I've found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want. And I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership.
Well, I always used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you'll know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
No, I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay to be members, and it's a way of not being beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Oh, absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner-city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I will join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story. Most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder of visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, who, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Blunt was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, for something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realise that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It's on the basis of getting people into jobs. It's about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress that since, of course, you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress it. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and Warburn. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, I don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit of stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you also support the British Envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
I think it very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let listeners know what projects you are working on with that and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years. And by now, we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament, with a learning centre below it. And the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you reference as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history of so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well. and particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine you were actually very content and happy. The former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you came quite unscathed from it.
I can't. He was very nice about
Yes.
it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
That's, but it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time. But I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years. And it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress. And it would be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know this is going to be a huge focus of the next review. Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off the crown and cushion to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.